Are we okay?
I think we are. Let us now praise famous men and the fathers that begat us. The Lord hath wrought great glory by them through his great power from the beginning. Men renowned for their power, giving counsel by their understanding and declaring prophecies. There be of them that have left the name behind them, that their praises might be reported. And some there be which have no memorial, who are perished, as though they have never been. But these were merciful men, whose righteousness hath not been forgotten. With their seed shall continually remain a good inheritance. Their bodies are buried in peace, but their name liveth for evermore. The people will tell of their wisdom, and the congregation will show forth their praise. Kipling. Good morning, distinguished guests, staff, Johannans. It is my pleasure to welcome you here today and to introduce both the second Hugh Lewin Memorial Lecture and our guest speaker. A special welcome to Ms. Fiona Lloyd and Ms. Thandi Lewin, Hugh's family, to members of council, a number of prominent South Africans, the headmaster, teachers, staff, students and parents of St. John's College. A warm welcome and a special thank you to our guest speaker, Dr. John Kani. It is right and fitting that we praise the fathers and mothers that begat us, especially the righteous men and women whose mercy will stand forever, as Kipling and Ecclesiasticus remind us. Hugh Lewin, O.J. Nash, 1956, was such a man as a South African, as an anti-apartheid activist, and as a writer. He was imprisoned from 1964 to 71 for his activities in support of the African resistance movement, following which he spent 20 years in exile. Returning in 92, as the negotiations to democracy were underway, he then worked for the TRC. Hugh had kept a secret record of his prison experiences written on the pages of a Bible, which formed the basis of probably his most famous book, Bandit, 7 years in a South African prison. We are proud to number Mr. Lewin amongst our OJs, an independent thinker who saw what was wrong and what justice needed, even when most of his immediate peers didn't. He not only saw, he acted on his principles, and he paid the price, a high cost, for fighting for justice. However, the cost of not being principled, while not as obvious, is ultimately even higher. Dr. Bonisile John Kani is likewise a thought leader and a man of great accomplishments. He is a most distinguished writer and actor, one of the greatest actors South Africa has ever produced. He's probably best known to you boys as King T'Chaka from the Marvel Universe, or as the voice of Rafiki on the remake of The Lion King. So convincing is he that after the sad and untimely death of Chadwick Boseman, Dr. Kani received many condolences in the passing of his son. However, on a personal level, I owe a great debt to this writer and actor. As a young varsity student, I was greatly moved by Sizwe Banzi is Dead, the play co-written by Athol Fugard, Winston Chawner, and John Kani, and most famously starring the latter two. This opened my eyes to a world which, I'm ashamed to admit, I'd hitherto been blind. The tragically absurd world experienced by Black South Africans every day in this country. His great performances in Sizwe Banzi and The Island helped change the thinking of many, many South Africans. And so I owe this man a profound thank you. His plays were seen as a threat to the securocratic state, and in 1975 he was beaten and left for dead by the police, an attack that saw him lose his left eye. Others have sought to reward him in far better ways, and John Kani has 3 honorary doctorates from our top universities, a Tony Award, the main theatre of the Market Theatre Complex named after him, the Order of Ikamanga in silver, and a string of other awards, along with an extensive list of plays, movies, and TV productions to his name. The second, Hugh Lewin Memorial Lecture, is a virtual one, such is the age. Those logged in can ask questions via Crowdcast in the dialogue box, bottom right. Boys, and all of us, there will also be a Twitter account for questions, but details will be given after the lecture to avoid distraction. And our thanks goes to the IT and estate officers for today's arrangements. I am so delighted to be able to express my thanks now to Dr. Kani for his impact on me and the nation, and to express them publicly. John Kani, as a great actor, has not only entertained millions, he has chilled us to the bone and made us think. To think, as Hugh Lewin showed us, beyond our own little lived experiences, and to start to think as South Africans. It is with great pleasure, therefore, that I invite Dr. Kani to address us. Dr. Kani.
Thank you. I can only start by saying my agent and manager are fired. I have a new person who could represent me and introduce me in all the activities. When I was asked to do this lecture on this great man, a humanist, a human rights activist, I pondered around the word human rights. And I tried to find the best definition. I looked in the law books. They were all so complicated and did not explain actually what is it that I am required to do, or what books of law. I said, if you drive and you are not sober, you will be arrested for endangering other passengers because you're driving a vehicle under the influence. If you commit a crime, but then if you violate human rights, what is the crime? What is the punishment? I was born in 1943 on the 30th of August in Port Elizabeth. Wow, that seems a long time ago. I grew up in New Brighton. My parents were wonderful. They hid the reality of the situation in South Africa. We had everything we could afford. So our wants and needs were based on what you knew could be made possible. If I wanted a sweet, I would be told, no, not yet. And that was enough. If I wanted anything and my father could afford, my mom could afford, then I will be given that. So the world around me had nothing to do with South Africa. It only was my life, my mom and dad, and my brothers and sisters, and life was wonderful. Until one day, my father and I went to town, which is Port Elizabeth, about just 8 kilometers from where I lived in New Brighton. If I stood in my father's house in the evening, with a candle or a paraffin lamp in the center of the table, and I could see the city standing right in front with all the bright lights and everything. If when we go to town, we would get in a bus and we'll be told to sit upstairs. And I thought perhaps my father had chosen the best view. And I was very excited about that until I realized, oh, only black people are sitting upstairs, white people are downstairs, which was a rather stupid because the best view on a bus, on a double-decker bus, is the one upstairs. We then got to the OK Bazaar for shopping. I was about 5, 6 years old. And suddenly, like a child, I wanted to wee. And I looked at my father's face and I said, I want a wee, Dada. And the way he looked at me, I affronted his dignity. I affronted his humanity because he had no answer for me. He knew where we were. We were about 500 to 600 meters to the railway station where there was one toilet available for black people. And then he looked at me and he said, why didn't you do this before we left home? How do I answer? I had no answer, but I looked at him. My father was 6'8" tall, and he was a policeman. He looked at me and he said, all right, let's go to the curb of the street. You urinate. Wow, what a relief. A white man walked past and said, what the hell do you think you're doing? My father said, tell him. Ask him. And when the white man looked at my dad, who was 6'8", he thought, I am not tampering with this man. He walked away. It stayed with me that why wasn't allowed? Why couldn't I find a toilet in Port Elizabeth? And then I realized slowly the existence of the system of apartheid. It was such a revelation because I looked at my dad and my mother and I couldn't work it out. How could they allow this? Why don't they have the power to change this? but it's complicated because sometimes when I'm trying to explain to my children and my grandchildren as to what is it? What is it? It was breaking the law. It was the laws of apartheid. It was the laws of Group Areas Act. It was the law for influx control. It was the native control. It was such a mess of laws governing this little 6-year-old boy that made his life absolutely incredibly difficult. And that's how we grew up as young Black children. But our grandmothers gave us the strength. They immediately said, you were a child of God and you are created in the image of God. So when I speak, I say, look in the mirror and see what you see. Tell me what you see. If you are created in the image of God, then it means you have the qualities, the resemblance of God. And if other people who are Xhosa, Zulu, Tsonga, Pedi, Swati, Indian, and colored people, I'm leaving white people for a moment, look in the mirror, they should see God. And if they have reverence and deep understanding and acceptance of God, therefore they would not see anything other than God when they look at each other or look at other people. The difference came when we looked at white people. White people seemed to say in their eyes, in their demeanor, in the way they looked at me, that I wasn't human. I was not part of the human race. I was some kind of sub-race that was here destined to serve, destined to be oppressed. And my worry as a child was, how do I correct this? How do I correct this? And my grandmother once told me story of these 7 little frogs that were swimming in a pool and 7 snakes tried to join them. They all jumped out because they said, we're different. They don't look like us. We're not allowed to play with them. But kids being kids, they jumped in the pool. It was a hot day and they had a great time. And then the frogs told their parents. And so did the snakes tell their parents that we've made new friends. And Papa Snake said, invite the frogs tomorrow evening for dinner. Chuckling, Mom said, they'll be the dinner. And the little frogs told Mom about meeting these new friends. And Mama Frog said, call Stutterfords, call the removal people who are relocating to a place so far away from here because we are in danger. I listened to the story and she left me there. And from that day, I swore that I would dedicate my life into getting those children back in that pond again. And this is what I have become, why I became a writer, why I became an actor. It was always the attempt to bring our people together, because I truly believe in my heart about the equality and the reverence for life and the love of God and the love of humanity. These are the principles and the precepts that drive my life. When I work as an actor or as a writer, from 1965, which was the first thing we did with Athol Fugard, Winston Jonah, and the rest of the Serpent Players, was a little story about a man who's been sentenced to 75 years, to 15 years in prison. And one of the Serpent Players was attending the trial of her husband, and the old man said, give this to my wife. Tell her I've got 15 years. Tell her to wait for me. He was 72 years old, and his wife was 68 years old. 15 years is a lifetime. But she looked at that and tell her, take this coat and give it to her. She held the coat, took a deep breath into the coat and said, I will wait. Other husbands are sentenced to life. Mine will come back. That was the beginning of what we called experiment in playmaking. It was when that we found a way, having done all the classics as actors, having done all the contemporary works from Brecht to Jean to Camus to Shakespeare and all of it. But that moment changed our lives, changed my life, and made me a storyteller. And my stories are always but the search for humanity in all beings, the search for truth, driven by trust and hope, driven by the belief that, as Bishop Tutu always said, that racism is learned. It could be unlearned. Now, I work all my life And suddenly I drew the attention of the security police in a very strange way. We were doing a play by Euripides called Dionysus, which was a Greek play. We were having fun. And this play, we did try to influence the subtext without changing the text, that this was the rise of Black power, Black consciousness, because we had just come back from a conference in Durban to the launch of the Black People's Convention, where Steve Biko, Bani Pichana, Nangwe Nkulu, and all Peter Jones, the people that really were in the movement, we were all together there and discussing the way forward. And what was funny is that we started the meeting very, very angry, almost trying to find a way, how do we eliminate white people? How do we kill them all and get them off the face of the earth and get back into our country? I still remember making a speech that we must find the remnants of those 3 ships that Jan van Riebeeck arrived with in South Africa, the dromedaries, the Goeie Hoop and something. And we thought we'd put all white people in there and then they would go back where they came from. But towards the end of the meeting, there was a strange coming together, a realization that we are all God's children. We all belong here as the preamble of our constitution, but then it was the Freedom Charter. South Africa belongs to all those who live in it. And that was the driving sinew, the driving vein through all of us. By the end of that meeting, we were clear that our work was not only to mobilize our people, but to also cross the street to the other side and find out from the white population of South Africa if there are people who think like us. You only have to look at the history of the African National Congress when it was founded in 1912 on the principle of non-racialism. And then we were, as we grow up, found out more and more people like Hugh Lewin, people like Bram Fischer, people like Dennis Goldberg, people like Bears Nodier. We thought, who are these white people? Why are they on our side? Or why are they on the right side? Why are they on human being side? What is it? And whenever we spoke with Arthur, it was always a situation of, I can sympathize. I can do everything. But it's a difference between you and me, is that you are in the middle of it. It impacts you personally, but it impacts me also, said Arthur Fugger, personally, because you're my friend, you're my fellow human being, you're my confidant, you're my comrade in the struggle for a better world. Therefore, your suffering cannot be measured by the fact that you are in or black or white. And then, of course, you learn more and more and more about the number of people who are on your side. It was then that we decided that because you are alone, you always think that these challenges are only you. Ask the neighbor will tell you exactly the same, and suddenly it is not you. The one that is no longer a minority, the one which is you becomes the majority. The one which is you become the majority of the people in your street, in your community, in fact, in your country. It is then that we realize that freedom is attainable. Freedom is almost there. We can achieve it. And thus began as a journey that I have held on to for the rest of my life. I've always believed in the equality of human beings. I've always believed in the sanctity of life. Here's a situation. We talk about human rights. It sounds so abstract. It sounds so taken for granted. Excuse me. That of course we've got human rights. Of course the South Africa people look at each other. But what is the given problem today? Why are we struggling with this issue of human rights on a broad level? Why are we still talking about white and black? Professor Kader Ashmal once said to me, you are a writer, John. You guys have to come together and develop a new English for South Africa, an English that brings us together, an English language that removes the past discrimination, precepts, and perceptions of who we are. And in English, then when I say we, I don't mean black people, I mean all of us. Why should I always, in my expressing myself in communication, say you people? Immediately, they, them, us. What can we find that would replace that? What language, what phrase can we use that would give us that feeling of belonging together, responsible for each other and for one another, caring for one another? And this context in me felt like, how do we do this? How do we find a way? As a writer, of course, I can tell a story. My stories are always driven by the plight of the individual, the dreams of the individual, the challenges of the individual. When I speak to younger writers, I always say, you can't write a play because you're angry of a particular law, of a particular situation. There is no play about laws and human rights, about AIDS, about gender-based violence and femicide. There is no law. But if you follow the life of an individual, you write about that individual, then it will come out the fact that what are the challenges of that individual. The breakthrough actually became in 1972 when we were sitting around with Athol and Winston thinking what's next. Because at that time, the grip of the apartheid regime was almost complete. There was what we called the conspiracy of silence. People were not talking about what is happening in the country. People were even afraid to think. The informal network within our Black communities was so structured and so strong that even with your own brother, you could not say things that you believe that might be revolutionary in the eyes of white people or the security. But it was exactly then that we felt that the time has come that we take that leap. We have been diplomatic, we have been mild, we have been calculated. Why don't we just sell the truth as it is, which was the birth of Sizwe Banzi is dead. A common, good human being trying to fend and feed his family, look after, play the role of a provider, underlying provider, because in the presence today, everybody is a provider. It's not exclusively set for men. And thus comes into the web confusion of the past laws of South Africa and has to give up his own identity, his own being, his own humanity in order just to get a job to pay him 12.50 a week. He assumes the identity of a dead man. He doesn't care what happened to the dead man, who was his name, and what was happening, but held by a city slicker who says it's a survival of the fittest. That began the journey, that I called upon myself, that my stories must speak power to the truth, that my stories must address the issues that I, John Kani, am uncomfortable with. Now, Ireland and Master Harold and all the plays, nothing but the truth, missing even my latest play, which is Kunene and the King, which I had to cut my long season at the West End in March because of the coronavirus. Gave me an opportunity to come home and sit with my wife, children, and grandchildren and play the role that is difficult, being a father, because every time I say to my kids, I want to talk to you, they says, oh, here he goes again, because they think I'm on stage. They think I'm going to tell them a story about something. This is what, for me, is the greatest challenge for all of us as human beings, is what do you see when you look at me? What do you see when you look at the other person? Well, even that person is black or white and you are white or black, what is it you see? How do you define the rights God-given? Unalienable rights in the Constitution, in the human rights at United Nations. People don't even know what the Constitution little book looks like. We have not encouraged the people to know their rights. Their rights, that's not about you can do this, you can't do this. These are rights entrenched in your being, in the being of the society. We still remain individuals. Even today, I speak, you speak, Annie speaks. We speak of each other as individuals because South Africa has given us an incredible past as heritage. A past that says, I'm now sitting in my house, and on my left, if I go more south, I'll end up in Soweto. I know that that's the past. I know that's what we inherited in the past. If I head north and east north, I'm going to end up in Centum, and I'm going to end up in Bryanston and Morningside. And if I look across the freeway, I don't want to see Alex. It blinds me. It keeps me thinking about what have I done for as long as Alex, for as long as Soweto, for as long as these informal settlements, which we give so beautiful names and even build as a government to try everything to uplift and upgrade the quality of life of the people. The task is enormous. I have seen poverty in Australia, in London, in Europe, in America, in Canada, but it is not a poverty that is created by a past which is legislated by the past governments at all. But it is poverty that hurts. It is the look in the eye of somebody and see no future and try to say, can I walk a little mile and help you see that there are possibilities, there are things we can do. So when you talk about human rights, you talk actually about the acknowledgement that I am a human being, and so is my neighbor, and so is the person walking in front of me that has never heard or seen me or talked to me. They have the same rights. Today it has moved, we talk about gender-based violence. I'm amazed at this violence that is within our society. People used to say, if you hijack the car, take the car and go, why do you shoot? If you break into a house for housebreaking and theft, take what you want. Why then do you rape and kill children and kill husbands? You go to farms. What is happening? Michelle Obama wrote a statement once, the fact that in America, more people have died with post-war traumatic experiences than they died in the war. I'm talking about the Afghanistan, I'm talking about people in Iraq. Those people, soldiers were sent there, come back. A certain businessman who owns all the shares of the stock exchange tried to challenge Michelle and found out that actually she had underestimated it. More people, because there was no debriefing, there was no ushering the people into civil society from the war straight into their homes, and they became the most dangerous element in that house to their children, to their wives and spouses and friends, until a program to reintegrate the ex-soldiers into the common civil society and make them cope. Now, you take South Africa, 1994, we were furious. We were still very angry. We were bitter. We were hell-bent to revenge. And that is why nothing but the truth I talk about. We expected the Nuremberg-style trials where all the white people, I remember, tortured me when I was arrested, when I was detained, when theaters were closed, when looked at me, and they would need to be tried. I remember one good gentleman, Mr. Reuben Marx, rest his soul, hear me, white, the Lieutenant Warrant Officer Reuben Marx, who used to make it his responsibility every time I come back from overseas to detain me and question me and ask me who have I met. And abroad, what is the plans of the ANC? I must admit that I work with a communist organization that is hell-bent on overthrowing South Africa. And all those things, 1994, I am told we are free. You can now go into a restaurant and eat. You can now get a job wherever you want it, but I don't have the qualifications because my education made it impossible for me to look after myself, to know anything except to speak good English, accept orders. What end can I do now that you can vote? Yes, I can vote. You know what my vote did? It deprived me of all the dreams that I had, that when I said the day we are free, this is the South Africa I envisage. This is the South Africa I'm looking forward to. I don't know that in 26 years, whether we've stepped back or we've moved forward. I was working with my granddaughter and we were right in the city, and I said to her, you see this wimpy restaurant? I wasn't allowed to eat here. She looks at me and says, why do you want to eat here? There are better restaurants. I said, oh no, we need to talk. It had nothing to do with the quality of food. It's a principle. It was the law that forbade me to do that. And I still haven't convinced her, which for me is a greater sign of progress. When I look at her and she tells me, why here? There are better restaurants. There's better food somewhere. It made me think we have a new generation. We have a generation, if we do not intervene, like does Papa Snake and Mama Snake, if we do not intervene as parents, if we just step back and allow the children, the next generation, to figure out their way forward, driven by the truth that we speak to them, that power. Sometimes as parents, both black and white, we forget that when we discuss the past, that our children and grandchildren are very close to a hearing distance and they can hear. When I see a white person in a shop or somewhere messing up and letting dogs loose to bite a beggar or a black person, what is it I say that my grandchildren would hear? When you white in your house see on television something you think, oh, these black people, we gave them everything, look how barbaric they are. Remember, you are now transferring your guilt, your past, your problems, your evil thoughts to the next generation. My little grandchild from my sister's daughter said to me some time ago that her white friend asked, how do you know when you clean after washing your face? Because your face remains dark as it is. I thought, how old is she? They were about 9-11. Where does that come from? Ask ourselves as parents, where does that come from? Therefore, we are failing to transfer honor, dignity, and humanity to the next generation. Our lives will continue to be challenged because we have not been honest enough as parents, as citizens of this country, to accept that the truth and reconciliation was a beginning. It is no point to try and nitpick it and tear it apart and say it never achieved what it was meant for. It achieved exactly what it was meant for, to set the foundation of a future South Africa, a future society for this country, which we needed to build on instead of interrogating it and find faults in it and find out what is it that worked and did not work, and we do nothing about it. Speaking at another conference in America, in England, this summer, I spoke about the responsibility of all of us. Stop calling it gender-based violence, femicide. Stop calling it the rape of women and children. Stop calling it the danger to the weaker. It's the violation of human rights. That's what it is. It is the violation of human rights. There was a time when I went to the circumcision initiation school where we spent weeks being taught about respect, humanity, dignity of the individual, and the protection of our wives, our mothers, our sisters. That's now gone. All I hear now is that somebody was killed last night. Someone asked me from London, oh, John, you must be using this time so wonderful. You must be writing now that you've got opportunity just to sit at home. I said, yes, I start. I'm sitting in front of the blank page and I'm about to write, and I hear a white family has been murdered on a farm. I grieve personally. And then I read that there has been a black woman has been raped and killed, and she was 68 by little kids who were 16 and 17. I grieve personally. And then I read these things, that there was somebody with a tirade of profanity and has said so many bad things about us black people or white people. I grieve personally. I grieve personally. It makes it impossible for me to allow my creativity to happen. So how are we going to look at this? By simply remembering those great heroes of the past who stood against all odds, who decided that they will stand up for the truth. A good friend of mine just passed away, George Bezos, who always spoke about memory. He said, if we use memory selectively and leave out many things, we will not pass on the good inheritance to our next generation. We must talk about these things. We must confess. We must confess and say, I have been in this situation. This is what I believed in. This is what I wanted to do with my life, but because of the environment that I was brought up in. We have to accept there is something called white privilege. We have to accept that, because then we can begin to say, how do we then work it in such a way that it becomes South Africans' privilege? That all of us feel we are part of this revolution and drive. But then you hear about corruption. And I'm thinking, who are these people? I'm 77 years old. Some of them are much older than, and I was in the trenches with them. We spoke in the 70s and the early 80s, even in the 90s, about a South Africa we all aspire to, where the dream of this non-racial, equal society, caring society, a people-centered government. What is going on? I can't explain it, but I can't sleep at night. When PPCs and virus COVID-19 has created an opening for wolves and hyenas to tear apart this small little fund that was going to get us through this pandemic. Today we move to level 1. What are we going to do about it? It's a violation of human rights. And if human means I was created in the image of God, then it means it's a violation of that trust between me and God. Then it means I have no future, even with the ancestors or post my death. It is my duty to stand for human rights. Cultural activists, political activists, social conscience, these are big words. Love thyself and love thy brother and thy sister. It is your responsibility. It is yours and mine directly. And as we spend each day working very hard to make sure that we do not get COVID-19, that we do not get ourselves involved in any incident, just driving through the street, we are so wide awake with your eyes to see danger where there's not even danger, because you're conscious of the insecurity that this modern South Africa has given us. That's how we should be vigilant on human rights. We should stand up any given time for something. Yes, we've marched for Me Too. We've marched not in my name. We've marched for gender-based violence and femicide. We've marched and marched and marched. We've advocated. We've made speeches. We became famous as leaders of certain movements. But we go home and sit down and continue our lives just as they were before the march, before the beautiful article. There's a dishonesty and non-commitment to the truth and to change from all of us. We do not go back and say, this meeting, these are the resolutions, this is what we are going to do. We had a plan to fight apartheid. We were executing it underground, inside and outside the country, in prisons and in detention, that we came out and continued that work. It is the same vigor, same commitment, same passion. We will get this country right. There's been an uproar simply because the president threatened to publish the list of all politicians and civil servants who are involved in the corruption of stealing the money for COVID-19 and rebooting the economy of this country. There's a threat within their own country that what the hell is he doing? He's serving white monopoly capital. The truth is you are being fingered. So we need not to stand with the president, not to stand with political parties. We need to stand with our own humanity. We need to stand up as South Africans and as human beings and says, this is not more, no more. And when I say no more, I mean there's a plan of action. What am I going to do? And that for me is the most important about human rights. It must be intolerable, repugnant Any violation on a child or a woman, another human being, even animal, as we share this earth with all the gift, poaching and killing of dehorning rhinos and taking tusks from elephants is a human rights violation because they are my inheritance. It's like you're destroying what was given to me by my great-great-great-grandfathers. Everything in this country is a violation of human rights. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kani. As a language teacher, and I cannot agree with you more, that transformation lies within language, not what we say, but also how we say it. And as the daughter of a human rights lawyer, I think you've explained human rights much better to me than my father could ever have, because he gets so lost in the mumble jumble of legal jargon. I really would like to thank you for being here with us today. But this is not the thanks. This is actually an opportunity for people who are sitting at home watching online to use the chat box to ask questions if they want to. And the boys, now's the only time when you can actually take out your mobile phones. And if you have only if you have a question, there's a Twitter handle that you can ask the question on, and it will be relayed to me. So the Twitter handle is #HLML Dr. Kani. I'll just repeat that. #HLML Dr. Kani. But to start us off, I was wondering if I can ask you a question, Dr. Kani.
Yes.
As I mentioned to you, I'm a language teacher. I teach Latin and I teach English at St. John's. And I was reading through some of the quotes that you have said over the years, and I was quite drawn to the number of times you've actually quoted something or mentioned Shakespeare in some of those quotes. And you said sometimes when you perform Shakespeare, you would say, how did this Englishman know so much about me? Or you find a parallel African folktale to some of the Shakespeare plays. Or you said that to you, he's like an African storyteller. Now, part of your talk today was about human rights and honoring Hugh Lewin, which is important. And part of your talk for me was also about how do we move forward and I want to say, I want to use the word decolonize, but how do we write that new language? How do you see the role of old texts like Shakespeare, Old English texts? It's labeled colonialist. How do you see their role in the future?
In this latest play, Kunene and the King, I study and explore the 25 years of our democracy with an incredible actor, Sir Anthony Shea, who is a South African born in Cape Town, educated in a high school down there. The play examines the interpretation of Shakespeare by a Shakespeare classical actor who loves Shakespeare, and a helper who looks after him because he's sick, who just loves, who's a great fan of Shakespeare. I remember in 1959 when my teacher walked into the classroom, and there was secondary school in Port Elizabeth, and said, we are now going to study Julius Caesar in isiXhosa. Wow. There was an incredible revolution, because pre that, we only knew so much of Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, and the other plays just by really fulfilling the deep study purposes in our classrooms. And I had a teacher who always wanted us to learn and quote sonnets. Love is not love, which alters when alteration finds. I just loved it because the little girls liked to hear that. I didn't know what it meant. But as I became a student of Shakespeare, or any writer for that matter, they always reflect the environment in which they grew up or existed. They always analyze the political, social situation of their environment. Shakespeare, in all his plays, taught us about human behavior. Not about wars and rights and wrongs, about human behavior. How does Shylock end up being the most hated, the most vilified character in The Merchant of Venice just because he wanted his pound of flesh? And what has that got to do with him being Jewish? How does then Othello being ostracized simply because he volunteered and risked his life as a mercenary to fight for the Venetians against the Turks? And he was being dined and wined and given everything in this modern South Africa. I know a lot of black people. I have a lot of white friends. But when it came to the fact that he wanted to marry their daughter, no, you're taking it too far. We don't want to mess up our pure heritage and line. How does Richard III sticks about the evil of disunity and creating sort of conflict within the kingdom so that he could be king? Is that not what's happening in today's political parties? I can go on. How does Romeo and Juliet still have so much relevance in our lives? I remember when one of the things my father feared most is for me to say I'm going to marry a girl who is not Xhosa. For crying out loud, we're all black, we live in the same community. He was afraid that I might marry a Zulu girl or a Sotho girl or a Swahili girl or a Paita girl. He was always worried about, why was he worried about that? Because that's the entrenched sort of attitudes within ourselves, which we have to break in conversation and practically within ourselves, so that when we speak a language of unity. When we write a language of reconciliation. We write a language that still speaks to all the people. And Shakespeare does that. Zeitzem does that. Sontonga does that. Tiosoga does that. And you can go through all the South African. Andre Blink does that. Jamie Coetzee does that. Everybody does that. But we seem to read these books, which is something that is really a dying pastime, reading. South Africans do not read. Even publishers have a problem to publish the books that have been written by South Africans because there is no market for it. If it's not dust collecting in the shelves of bookshops. So you're only fortunate if the Department of Education, whichever level, try to use your book, and then you'll be able to survive. But the important thing is that I love Shakespeare because it deals with the five senses. The smell, the touch, the feel, the hearing, the seeing. In that way, it reminds me of the great folk tales. That I am a descendant of great kingdoms. So did my grandmother too tell me. He said to me, "You're a prince." I said, okay. For a good time, I believed it. Then I realized maybe she meant empowering myself. That I am no inferior nor superior to any other human being. I too have a right to exist, breathe, and explore, pursue happiness and liberty. That's what she gave me. And I'm handing it over to my generations that will follow. So the art books, in whatever form, reflect the given time, everything that was happening during the writer, when the idea was born, when the idea that became a work of writing that you read. If you just think clearly, what was the given situation of that time? And that is why Shakespeare is important. And any other literature is important. If we do not read, we turn into ourselves and we regurgitate the old knowledge and not even wisdom, just information around ourselves, and we become less every day if we do not bring in new thoughts. You've got to feed the brain before you think about a slimming diet, a healthy diet, before becoming a vegan. Please feed the brain.
Thank you very much. What a comprehensive answer, and I hope our boys are listening. The other question that has come through via the platform is, it's quite a simple question, but I think the answer is quite complicated. What questions do we need to ask our children? And this is asked by a teacher, so I'm thinking it's our children and the children whom we teach. What questions do we need to ask our children today?
When we were doing Black Panther in Hollywood, and you know the story of Black Panther, about this African country somehow that was never colonized, that is so technologically advanced that it needs to share their wisdom with the world while protecting their own identity. And the young man, Chadwick Boseman, may the God rest his soul in peace, asked me a question. Are you happy? I said, but what? The way I'm playing this role. I said, there could be no one who could do this better than you at this given time, because he was committed to the truth. The conversation that I sometimes have with my own children, what are you thinking? And the answer I always get, nothing. I think it's impossible. That brain never stops. But it does. It does stop if you're not asking questions. Are you happy? Can we talk? Is there anything you'd like to share with me? Be intrusive, be curious, get into their lives. I'm talking about at home. Find out, even if as we are men, very difficult to ask our daughters, who you're going out with, what is your relationship? Our sons, what do you think? You read an article, ask, what do you think? What is your opinion? At schools, we need to ask, are you being fed mentally? Are you learning something? Are you understanding? What does it mean to you? How could you interpret it? I remember we held a workshop with Vanessa Cook at the Market Theatre at a school in Orlando about Romeo and Juliet as a textbook. We said everything that was in the theme being helped by the late Professor Ian Stedman, who was the head of drama at Wits University, so that they could ask all the questions. I remember they asked all the questions in the exams, which we answered, eloquently as actors, because we've been briefed. Until one young man who's been looking there, half confused, half not listening, he says, Doc, I understand. I get it now. It's like Romeo's parents are Zulu and IFP, and Juliet's parents are ANC and Xhosa. These two young people have no future. They're doomed. He could have said, it's like Romeo and Juliet are white. Their parents. Juliet's parents are white and Romeo's parents are black. That was a major breakthrough, to use your own life, cultural, historical reference into understanding. We tend to use, when we teach, what I call the seagull syndrome. We fly into the nest and we drop the food into the little chicks' mouths. Those that regurgitate it and take it out as I put it in are the ones that are regarded as very intelligent. The other ones that bring it out with a different form, influenced by their own interpretation, may get a D-. So what is it we want our children to, how to express the lesson? Must it be exactly as it is? I remember in my matric, 1961, we were doing the events that led to the Balkan War and led to the to the Second World War. I found a book which explained it, and I studied it. I had a great memory, and in my assignment, I almost quoted that whole paragraph verbatim, that whole 2 pages. And my history teacher said, very, very good, John. This is what Pringle says. What do you say? I was so surprised that my teacher would know this. That's what we should be talking to our children. Creative, critical thinking. Tell me what you feel. Tell me what you think. What I've just done the lecture. Let's talk about it. Tell me, what are you receiving? Tell me what you're understanding. In the 50s, we were told that by Bantu education, that we were Bantu tribes that migrated from the north. By the time we got into the southern part of South Africa, white people were already here. And my teacher, Mr. Mkaga, Mr. Kunta, would say, well, that's what you will write for the exam. But this is the truth. So these are the engaging, critically, making the students re-ask the question. Because we're bound by, we teach for exams. We even have numbers of previous exam papers. We can download exam papers from 2021, 2019 to 2016. And we guess what the 2020 exam for matric is going to be. And it is that which the kids will then practice themselves, be so good in answering exam questions when they have learned nothing throughout their history and time with the teacher in the classroom. We've got to find a different way of even the concept of examination, which is not actually regurgitating exactly what we've given them or poured into them so that they could pass to the next. I sat on the Wits Governing Council for 8 years. We talk about put through. We look at the kids that registered for the first year, how many of them are in the second year, third year, and finally get out. The number diminishes in an incredible way. It's not financial at this particular time. It's simply not coping, because the metric of grade 1 to grade 12 has been spoon feeding and pouring in and getting it out as I, the teacher, had put it in there. So when they get to university with a lecturer who speaks as if he's in a daze and just say reference so and so, the kids are lost. So when they walk out of university, they are unemployable. As George Bezos said, I don't know what these kids learn at school. They can't put together a simple line or string and argument for defense. That's perhaps we shouldn't ask too much questions on the children. We should ask more of ourselves. Am I being heard?
Wow, what a powerful answer. I think for us as teachers as well, I think there's a lot to learn from the younger generation coming through. There's one of our students who's asked a question. He says, thank you for the incredible address, Dr. Kani. He says, I'd be interested to hear a bit about how you think we ought to use Sizwe Banzi is dead in our current social moment, especially as Black men in South Africa and the theme of identity in the play.
Sizwe Banzi examined in the 70s the issue of documentation, ID, permits, interfering with human freedom of movement and existence. Today we have 1,000 Sizwe Banzis, 1,000 Sizwe Banzis, people who are forging ID documents, sell them. Today, people are doing that, infiltrating other people's bank accounts, create a credit card to siphon the money out. People are walking around with a Nigerian DRC with a North African accent, and yet his name is Alfred Kumar, because they bought that passport, they bought that ID. I used to fly to London without a visa, but the number of fraudulent documents that the UK immigrations were confronting or seeing, of people calling themselves South Africans, now we need a visa to go to England. So the Sizwe Banzis, people determined or prepared to give up the self. So that is why Sizwe Banzi says to Buntu, the character that's helping him to survive, simply take on the identity of this dead man, get a job, feed your family. He says, Buntu, my children are registered as Banzi at school. I'm their father. What do I tell them? How do I go home? And that is for me when he says, Buntu, dear, nowhere to. I've got wonderful news for you. Sizwe Banzi, in a manner of speaking, is dead. But I'll tell you all I can. That is the crux of our existence. That's the crux of identity. The man struggling with becoming who he is not. Sitting on boardrooms agreeing with the chair when you know the chair is wrong for survival purposes. Sitting in the Zondo Commission and you do not believe that they were intelligent thinking people who allowed this to go on. The Premier ad that said black hair is dirty and rough, white hair is smooth and silk. There were people in that room. That advert was interrogated. It was discussed. Visuals were talked about. I'm an award-winning commercials director. I have a Clio, which is a New York World Award. I've won in Cannes. And we do with the agents, with the client, with everybody. But the people there were afraid to think, lest they think out of the box. I'm saying get rid of that stupid box. Think freely. No one said to that ad, this can't do today in South Africa. There were people who were thinking, but they were afraid to threaten their income. They were afraid to be known as the person always raise my hand, I want to ask a question. Like a little student who's always has a hand up and the teacher says, I see you next, because you're bored that they keep asking these stupid questions, but they're questions seeking knowledge and clarity. But we also need honesty from the student side, because when an actor asks a lot of questions, they didn't do their homework, because they would be contributing than asking questions. So Sizwe Banzis are all over in our lives. People assuming identity for survival purposes. And that survival is ruthless in the sense that they will do anything to be successful. We talk about power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in my play, Missing, I say, I never knew that wanting that power can corrupt just as much, where people are prepared to do anything to get into government, to get into a position of seniority decision-making, where this stealing and thieving is taking place. There's been we're rudderless. There's no measurement of morality and honesty and dignity, because we've now become the surviving nation at all cost.
Thank you. Wow. I think we can have a conversation all day long. I've got a few more questions and I'm going to just stop it there. Otherwise, I think clearly your talk has inspired a lot of people and it's raised a lot of questions. So I've got another one from a boy. He's asking, he says, do you think, Dr. Kani, protest art, such as protest plays, are as important as traditional activism, such as physical protests and marches?
Whatever form of protest is necessary, because it means we're thinking. Protest theater was a title we were given by the apartheid government and the press that was questioning the work we do in destabilizing what was known as theater. That had nothing to do with politics. We were told that if you have a message, use the Western Union. Art and politics do not mix. The point was, then, if I live my life restricted, constricted by segregation and laws, what story can I tell? We did an exercise in 1989, I still remember, at the Market Theatre, where we asked students from Woodmead, from St. Sacred Hearts, and all the high schools to write in an essay about the weekend. All the students of the northern suburbs talked about going to Vanderbale Park Dam, going to the zoo, going to see friends. And all the students in the township talk about a horror weekend of death, of crime, of everything, and seeing friends, of course, and that they were so waiting and desperate for Monday so they could be at school and their safety somehow secured. So each of those children reflected their own environment. We asked kids, I was looking in Durban, kids were born in KwaMashu, painting. We were at this festival, the arts festival, and the people from the rural areas painted mountains like the 1,000 rolling hills of Ellen Payton in Cry the Beloved Country. And yet kids within the urban areas draw this concrete jungle and cities of tall scrapers and the beach, and some was called poverty and informal settlements, some called crime. It is the responsibility of a human being to react. This is the role of the arts. The role of the arts is to reflect the environment in which the young or the artist is existing in at that given time, or even historically how they got here. So protest theater must not be seen as a form of theater that always protests the given laws and situation. It is an interrogating form of theater. It is a theater that explores, that asks questions, a theater that says, I am here, what are you, do you see me? Do you see me? I asked a question to my friend in the latest play. Do you ever talk to me, Lunga Kunen? Or do you talk to a nurse or a black man? Do you ever talk? Do you hear yourself when you talk to me? Can you understand what's coming out of your mouth? That is then the genre of creative, thought-provoking, challenging old ideas, new ideas. That's the theater that was labeled as protest theater. And during those days, Brecht came in also just post the Second World War, at a time when Germany was ravaged and there was absolutely nothing to live for. Even the task of rebuilding Germany seemed insurmountable. People were just paralyzed by that. And Brecht came with the term of poor theater. It didn't mean that the quality of the theater was poor, but it was a theater that speaks to those that need to hear the message most. And that is, for me, protest theater. It's theater. It's people talking South African theater, English theater, American theater, French theater, Australian theater, African theater. It's storytelling, sir. It's once upon a time. When my grandmother started like that, we knew someone had done something wrong. We're going to listen to a story with a sting of the scorpion in the last two couplets of what we were supposed to do or we did not do. That's the role of the arts, is to reflect, is to deal with the inner feeling in the way in which it deals and struggles with the outer feeling. There's a constant conversation within ourselves as writers and as human beings, for that matter, that makes us want to tell this story. And the story always must begin from a personal point of view. You can't write about, tell a story, and then other people will read, will tell you what it is about.
Thank you very much for that. I think I'm going to ask one more question, and it comes from our platform, and it says, thank you, Dr. Kani, for your inspiration. The person says, I'm in marketing and very scared about all the racial backlash almost on a daily basis. What is your view to addressing or preempting naivety, ignorance, or denial?
When I used to do a lot of fundraising for the Market Theatre to survive before 1995, when we were finally funded by the government, it used to be our duty to study the company we are targeting. We used to want to know what is their criteria for funding. We used to want to know what is their mission and objectives, what is it they stand for, so that we could structure the proposal to that fund. I still remember we wanted to apply for money from the Rockefeller for our AIDS project. And the Rockefeller just simply said, we don't fund AIDS programs. I said, why? He says, it is immoral not to do so after some time. So we don't want to catch ourselves in that situation. We want to fund the project. We could say you have completed it by the end of a year or two. We can't do that on AIDS. We would then change the proposal to suit what is it they're funding today or this particular period. So we then would ask for that. Now, you talk about what do we do in the advertising industry. It's very, very difficult because when you enter into the boardroom, you're so excited and so grateful that you've reached the level to be in the midst of these powerful minds, demagogues, conservatives that have the years and years of experience that keep saying this is how we do it and fail and don't realize that they need to change. How then do you come in and raise your hand? That is, as my father would say, how do you change the police force? By joining the police force. Because you're going to start by walking the beat. By the time you become a colonel and sit down where policy is decided, you'll be dead by then. Or you would have been so sucked into the formulas and the workings of this organization. It's very difficult, but let your voice be heard very gently. Be diplomatic. Know as you walk in that the structure here is not conducive to new voices, new ideas. They have done this for years and they want to use the same formula. And that is why certain racial insensitive things can go through without being asked. and take responsibility simply by saying, I have a small question. I agree with you. I absolutely understand your idea, head of marketing, is brilliant, but have we looked at it this way? Maybe we should consider this, but be gentle, because we get these jobs because we're desperate. We get these jobs because we've just qualified in a marketing this from AAA, from whatever whatever institution you come from, and you are desperate at that stage to get the job, pay money, and help parents or yourself. You've moved into a new flat, so you don't want to ruffle feathers, but deal with your conscience. Are you able, as I always say, to look in the mirror and like what you see? And when this explosion happens of racial insensitivity, take personal responsibility. But I don't know, I'm very theoretical here, but the point is there are times I'm also being directed by directors in a movie who are telling me, I did a movie where the accent and the Africa consultant was a woman from Canada. He's telling me about the Swahili culture in The Ghost and the Darkness. Until Michael Douglas says, excuse me, what do you think, John? What do you think? What do you think? You're an African. You understand me? But at the beginning, you are tuned into the ear of the audience that will be seeing this movie when it has its international release in Idaho, in mid-America, in Europe. They want to hear your accent. You actually speak your accent closer to the lead, who has a wrong accent. He sounds between Pakistani and North Africa and West Africa and Jamaican, and yet he says he's Zulu. So it's very difficult, but slowly, as you move up that little ladder, half a rank on the ladder, begin to make your voice known, but go through the process. Be diplomatic, be sensitive to these great fundis that are sitting at the table as chair and head of marketing. It's the only way. But I always say, negotiate the situation with you inside rather than being outside.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kani. And we're just going to do a quick seat swap with one of the students who's just going to say thank you to you. Just hang on for a moment. Okay, come on, sit. I've switched your video off. I'll put you back on in a minute.
Thanks, Mama.
Okay, you ready?
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Kani, for taking time to come speak to us today. It's a privilege and an honor to have been able to listen to what you said today. And with reference to when you said, when the situation politically became intolerable within South Africa, we use the arts as a weapon for change. This quote really stuck with me because I thought about all that you, many leaders and protest actors, have done to make society better for us all today. And then I also thought about how the arts allow us to actually dig deep and investigate ourselves. I specifically enjoyed when you spoke about why you became a writer and an actor, the idea of bringing people together in such a segregated society and such a selfless act. Also the idea of looking at all people as the same, as one human race instead of you people. Beyond today, I would also like to thank you for all that you've done for dramatic arts in particular, and for our country to bring it to where it is today. You're an inspiration for many people in our country, but in particular, many boys at our school. And on behalf of the school, I'd like to thank you and say that we truly feel honored that you were able to deliver the Hugh Lewin Memorial Lecture here today. In drama, one of the main things that we study is the island. The play teaches us to be resilient and throughout life and sheds light on the conditions that many political prisoners faced. It's a timeless piece of art that has taught us lessons that we need to carry forward into our lives. It's therefore honestly surreal to have you with us here today and give us insight and knowledge about your experiences as a resistance actor. Some may only know you for your appearances on the big screen, but I hope because of what you have said today and what you've told us today, that we see you as so much more than just an actor. I think we can all agree that we honestly truly feel grateful that you could come here and deliver your speech here today. And on behalf of St. John's College, I would like to thank you deeply for your time here today.
I am so happy. Every day I hear the youth and young people speak, and they speak about how they feel and how they see things, their honesty. Memories of islands, Sizabanzi, Master Harold and the boys, my children, my Africa, Sizabanzi is dead, are little vignettes and little markings on the road you will travel. You will always say, oh, I know that play. Actually, I've experienced that play. The play was written, The Island, about men's inhumanity to men. And that it is men that set and send those men to spend the rest of their lives on Robben Island simply because they wanted the South Africa of today. It is about the indestructibility of the human spirit. The fact that these two men living on that island could still have the yearn to do a play called Antigone and ask the question that there are laws that come from God, there are those that come from men. Where is my allegiance lie? The play is about the brotherhood caring for each other. When John in the play sees the bruised eye of Winston, and in the middle trying to attend to it, Winston notices that John at the back of his ear, he's bleeding, and therefore forgets his pain in identifying the other man's pain. The truth and hope, what I call in the island, is the hell of hope and the hell of despair. The fact that John is tortured by the fact that he will soon be released. He feels guilty for being released. And yet Winston knows that he cannot count his days beyond one. He's not here for 15 years, for 12 years. He's all here for the rest of his life. Therefore, when you say count the number of days left, he says one. Next day, one. Another day, one. Another day, one. And finally, he says, one day I will not be counting anymore. We were down the influences of that time. At that stage, I wrote this, Winston and I and Arthur wrote this play. My uncle was on Robben Island. At the stage we wrote that play, I was already been so many times detained, sitting in my solitary confinement cell and smiling. It was those days that we accepted death as the ultimate honor for your contribution and commitment for a struggle for a better South Africa. Being sent to Robben Island, we almost like little kids, stupid enough, we wanted to be arrested so that we could go to Robben Island, so that we could end our stripes as a member of the struggle. But those days are for you to look at and empower you and give you the strength to say, not, never again. As Nelson Mandela said in inauguration, never, never, never again. It is our responsibility. I always say to young people, we're in the same race together. We may be different generations. But when we run a relay race, I do the first 100 meters and hand over the baton to you. You hand it over to someone else, and the last person to run this race will be Usain Bolt. And when we are Ombike, or when we are right at the end of the race, the four of us celebrate. Come and get the baton from my hand now, not after I've retired, not after I'm dead. Pick it up from my hand now and run with it. Let me see you succeed. Then I will rest in peace with the ancestors.
Thank you very much, sir.